Hello and welcome to Cape Ann ARTWaves. Cape Ann ARTWaves is a member program of 1623 Studios based here in Gloucester, Massachusetts. We kicked off this program in March of 2020, and to date, we've interviewed over 65 artists, and we've seen over 12,000 views on YouTube. So it's very exciting. My name is Jacqueline Ganem DeFalco. I co-produce and co-host the show with Christine Fisher. And we are very excited today to be able to introduce Greg Bover as our artist. Say hello to Greg, everyone. And Greg, say hello.
Hiya.
Okay. Cape Ann ARTWaves is made possible by our generous sponsors: Prince Insurance Agency, M. Christine Fisher, visual artist; Cape Ann Savings Bank, Compass Realty and Martha Anger, real estate advisor; Protective Packaging Inc., and the Common Crow Natural Market. So we'd really like to thank our sponsors and also recognize our musicians, Steve Lacey and Pat Verga, for their help, and acknowledge C Arts and 1623 Studios, who are our partners in making this show happen. So today our guest is Greg Bover, and Greg has had several different lives here on, before he came to Cape Ann and on Cape Ann. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Greg for those of you who haven't already met him in one of his many community programs that he's been involved in. Greg was actually most recently at CB Fisk, which is our local organ maker here in Gloucester at Condyland Park. And he was the vice president for operations at CB Fisk, but his career there was actually for 42 years. So CB Fisk is a designer and builder of pipe organs for churches, concert halls, and academic institutions across the United States and around the world. And for those of you who haven't been there, I hope that now that things are opening up, they'll once again open up their amazing factory, workshop, studio, for others to really experience this incredible place that we're lucky enough to have here in Cape Ann. So as vice president, and prior to his role there as vice president, Greg had many jobs, among them being the project manager, leading structural, mechanical design, and participating in the visual and architectural aspects of each project. And he also had, believe it or not, time to do some of his own woodworking on the side, which was something that the company encouraged. Greg's love of woodworking started long before his work at CB Fisk. It actually started when he was 14, working with his father up in New Hampshire, all throughout New England, actually building houses. His father was a carpenter and a mechanic. And so this started a long time ago for Greg, and it's obviously part of his DNA. So Greg actually went to the University of New Hampshire, and after he graduated, he moved into the boat building world for a while as both a cabin and a deck carpenter with a company called Bruno Stillman in Newington, New Hampshire. But throughout his time doing woodworking, he really always had his own work that he was doing on the side, and he was influenced by the arts and crafts movement. And then later on, as he was involved in organ building and traveled throughout the world, he was able to pick up the mission style and influence from Asian cultures that he incorporated into his own design. So now that Greg is newly retired, he's keeping his fingers in many pies, and among them, he's actually the ship's carpenter on the schooner adventure. And so of late, you would find Greg there, I would say, a majority of the time. And for those of you who didn't run into Greg at the schooner adventure, you've probably known him from the Sawyer Free Library, where he was the president of the board, or the Cape Ann Chamber, where he has been active, or Awesome Gloucester, the Gloucester Historic Commission, the Rotary Club, the UU Church, and I could go on and on. He has been an amazing member of this community. So I'd like to re-welcome you. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be able to speak with you today. So let's dig in and have Greg tell us a little bit about, I'd love to know more about your upbringing. I'd love to know more about the time with your father. He's obviously a big influence on you, and to share any particular experience that was really transformative in terms of your work as a woodworker, a craftsman, anything along those lines.
Sure. Well, thank you, Jackie, for doing this, and I'm really happy to talk to you about where I came from and how it all started. I just started working summer jobs and weekend stints with my dad, who was a carpenter for many years in southern New Hampshire at that time, the 50s and 60s. The place was booming and lots of people were building houses. And so it was kind of a natural to do that with him. And I learned a lot from him about working, how to work, how to show up in the morning and do a full day's work, and a lot about the proper attitude toward tools and their care. And I have a friend who says he learned woodworking by losing and breaking all his father's tools. And I wouldn't quite go that far, because he was pretty careful about what he loaned to me.
Yeah.
But yeah, I took a lot of advantage of his expertise, and he introduced me to a lot of the basics of woodworking. But I also recognized his frustration at needing to build things when you are limited to what you can get from the lumber yard. The dimension lumber that's available is quite limiting. It's mostly all too big. It's pretty hard to build anything with grace and finesse. And that was a frustration for him. I picked up on that. And so when I was at UNH, getting a degree in political science, it was the late 1960s. I think everybody got one of those.
Good point.
I took a lot of classes on the side, elective classes at their really wonderful woodshop at UNH on the Durham campus. And so I got a lot more training there. And when I got out of UNH, I wanted to stick around in that area and got a job in Newington at Bruno and Stillman, where they built fishing boats mostly, that had fiberglass hulls, but the decks and cabins were wood. And that was the crew that I was on, and worked with a lot of good guys in a pretty heavy duty production atmosphere, and learned more about that side of woodworking.
Oh, absolutely. So when you look overall at, the time working for your father, and then your job, and then whatever you were doing while you were in college, and then this work after college, anything that just really stands out as like one of the really funny experiences or close calls, or, anything else, anything about that, was, I would call a good wake up call about doing this kind of work?
Well, at Bruno and Stillman, there was an assembly line, and we did the same things over and over and over again. And I learned a lot about efficiency and how to incorporate that attitude into my work. But I wanted to get into something a little more custom, where I wasn't doing the same thing day after day after day, that had a little bit more artistry to it.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why I got a job with William Dowd, who was at the time one of the premier harpsichord makers in the world.
Interesting.
And he had a shop in Cambridge, Mass. And I worked there for a year, and then he sent me to his other shop in Paris, France. So that was my first international foray.
Yeah.
in both shops, I got to work with really wonderful craftsmen, craftspeople, and learned a tremendous amount and got my start in making musical instruments.
I have to tell you, I can't say that it's a natural leap to go from boat building to harpsichords. You've got to help me out here, Greg, and tell me how you got what inspired you to work on harpsichords? I mean, this isn't even an instrument most people can say they've seen. And so we are going to show a picture of one. So, you've got to tell us a little bit about that journey.
Well, the short part of a long story is that I met a woman who is now my ex-wife, and through her family connections, I got a job with William Dowd in Cambridge. So that was the start of it, just knowing the right people at the right time when I was looking for some kind of woodworking that was a little more refined than throwing fishing boats together.
Okay. All right. But it's good to know, it's good to understand some of those fundamentals. I think what you talked about earlier, I would call workmanlike manner from somebody that I know very closely that has discussed that with me. And, also just that it's not all glamorous, right? I mean, it's really hard, repetitive work, and repetitive work is not for everybody. It takes a lot of patience.
That's right. You've got to have what we used to say at CB Fisk is that you've got to have a rich inner life.
Ah, good point.
So that your mind doesn't go crazy or just wander all over the place while you're doing something for the 300th time. That all 300 of them have got to be perfect. That kind of focus is something I've enjoyed more and more throughout my life, cultivating that focus so that I can do things more than once and not lose the joy in it, and also not lose the attention that it takes and attention to detail that it takes to do that well and safely.
That's a beautiful way of putting it, having a rich inner life, Greg. And I'm going to remember that, because I think that applies to, I think, a lot of folks that are deeply into their craft. Super important. And it's a wonderful way to have guided people at CB Fisk. So now that we're on that topic of CB Fisk and organs in general, I think it's really important because it's certainly one of the most, the biggest hidden secrets of Cape Ann in many ways is what goes on behind the walls of an organ building establishment. And I'd love for you to talk about it, because it's so much more than any one art or craft. It's a combination of many coming together in such a fine way, right down to the tuning of the instrument. It's certainly, for me, one of the most fascinating things I've ever been exposed to. I'm very grateful for having had that opportunity. So it touches on architecture, design. It's, it just goes on and on. So I think you could, with all your experience, help everybody visualize exactly what goes into this process and what you kind of learned and took away from building of some of these great organs that we're going to show, Opus 91 and Opus 100, as we go through this. So take us on the organ building journey for a moment.
Well, one of the things that I really loved about organ building was that it combines art and science in a really wonderful way. And I always thought when I was in school and when I was first working that I was going to have to choose between art and science. I didn't know that there were jobs out there where you really have to have both sides of that in your life and in your work and in your approach to work, and how rewarding it can be, extra rewarding, because I've always loved math and physics and always have been interested in them. but I also have ideas about design and approaches to design that I wanted to explore. And so here was organ building, where there's a lot of stuff to figure out when you're building a musical instrument that can weigh 50 tons. There's the structural side of it, and how are you going to hold all that up and make sure that it doesn't move. And so just the sheer weight of it and the structural part of it, steel framing mostly, and then the properties of wood, how it comes and goes. You have to allow for that if you're building precision instruments out of a material that never stays still. You have to learn how to design for that. Then there's all the pipe work, which is made of alloys of lead and tin. At CB Fisk, we make our own metal from scratch. We melt down ingots of lead and tin and mix them in various alloys and cast it into sheets, and then roll those sheets up into tubes, and that's how the pipes are made. 20% of the hours that go into building a pipe organ are just making the pipes, and there can be thousands of them. The largest instrument that CB Fisk has ever made was in the Lausanne Cathedral in Switzerland, and has over 7,000 pipes. And
Wow.
then there's the whole musical side of it, which I was less involved in, but I still had to understand that side of it to manage the projects, which was about 30 years of my 42 years there. Each pipe speaks into an acoustic and has to be adjusted to that acoustic, and every building is different, has different acoustical properties. So there are thousands and thousands of hours that go into adjusting the pipes to the acoustics of the building, which can only be done on site.
It's so overwhelming, you know, when you think about it, but at least help me out and say, what's the very, very first thing that gets done when you go down this road?
But just to make the proposal, you have to go and see the building and measure it and listen to music in that space and see what qualities the space has, both that support the music and that don't support the music, and what changes might be made, and all that kind of stuff. And then design, come up with a design that the people with the decision-making authority like. And so there's the visual side of it, of course, the architectural side of it. And then once that design has been accepted, then you can go ahead and start designing all the pieces and then having them made, and then putting them all together in Gloucester and making the organ work, and then taking it all apart again and shipping it where it's going to go.
It's incredible. At what point do you make the model? Because we're going to show a model for one of the organs here for Opus 100.
Right.
It was done for Dallas.
So the models are made, we build a model of the building. So you've got to go to an existing building and take a lot of measurements and photographs, and then construct a scale model of the building so that the design of the organ can be done in 3D in the model. And that is a long process. That's right at the beginning, of course, after the contract is signed, but before much of the actual construction of the organ itself even begins.
I was thinking about this, and I didn't ask you this before, but I'm wondering what the organ builders did before we had computer aided design. I mean, you know, really incredible, right? To think about that.
Yeah, well, I'm old enough so that when I started at CB Fisk, we didn't even have calculators. We were still using slide rules.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, that was in the 70s, 1970s. There were calculators around, but they weren't all that much help. Um, and we didn't really get into computers until the late 80s, early 90s. So I had quite a fair stretch there where we were still doing everything on paper.
Wow.
And even after we got to the point where we were doing 3D computer aided design, we still would build a model because it gives you a sense of the room that you can't get from any screen. You can move around and look in it and get different perspectives of the actual relationship between the architecture of the organ and the architecture of the room.
Okay, so you did 60 of these in your career, is that correct?
Well, there were 60 organs built at CB Fisk during my 42 years. And
Right.
I was project manager on 30 something of them.
Right.
There was another fellow who was also project manager, and we would take turns. While he was managing the construction of one instrument, I'd be working on the design for the next.
Right. Gotcha. So it's not a trick question, but I'm curious, were there any like major surprises along the way, like things that really jumped out at you or challenges that you said in this 30 some odd projects, like, wow, this one really stands out, like this one almost knocked my socks off?
Well, one of the organs that we have a photograph to show is Opus 91, which was originally built for a private home in California. This gentleman built a concert hall on his ranch, and we designed and built the organ for this, and he used it for many years. And then after he died, his widow asked us to find a new home for it, and it was taken out of their house and put in the University of Indiana. Indiana University. But that was the major, one of the most complicated pieces of woodworking that we had to do. It's very ornate. It has wonderful carvings by Morgan Falls Pike, who also did the Fisherman's Wives statue on the boulevard in Gloucester, and many other beautiful carvings. She did lots of carving for CB Fisk over the years. And also just the woodworking in general. It's in the style of instruments in the Alsace region of France in the 1780s. So it's extremely ornate woodworking, and that was perhaps the biggest woodworking challenge in my career.
Wow. Wow. Really phenomenal. And anything else that you want to mention in terms of the, just trying to make this all come together, in a symphonic way at CB Fisk? Any other things that sort of jump out at you? You must have a million stories.
Oh yeah, there are a million stories.
They have to be.
that largest organ that we ever built, that was in Switzerland, that had to be built in pieces in our shop because we didn't have a space big enough to set it all up at once. And then it had to be shipped in sea containers from Gloucester to Lausanne.
Wow.
And then reassembled in this cathedral that was built in 1285.
Oh my goodness.
So just logistically, it was challenging. Lost some sleep here and there over that one. And it was immense as well. Just a huge, tall structure with huge cantilevers out over the nave. And
but I just wanted to have you articulate, the breadth and depth of this in terms of the artistic side of it, because it's just not so obvious, to the average person what would go into.
No, and another person I'd like to mention is Charles Nazarian, who has been the visual designer at CB Fisk for 40 something years. And my long time work with him was very fulfilling, very imaginative, creative person. I learned a lot from watching him work and how he approached designs and trying this and trying that, building models and sketches and just refining and refining and refining until the organ looked like it had always been there. That was one of the real tricks, was to put a brand new instrument in sometimes a very ancient building and have it look like it really belonged.
Yeah, absolutely. And he is another one that's contributed so much to the community. So I'm so glad you mentioned him. You know, revert back to this little snippet in your bio where you mentioned that the company encouraged people to work on their own projects after hours. And that's where you were able to continue to pursue your own love of woodworking. And so, you know, I'm just curious about, you know, what were some of the things that you actually did there? I think you mentioned to me that the harpsichord was actually building that harpsichord we showed earlier, which we're going to show again, was one of your first projects after hours, or?
No, but it went on for a very, very long time.
Oh, okay.
I worked on that Sunday mornings for almost 25 years.
Wow.
It just took forever. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours in a harpsichord, and working on them, you know, 3 or 4 hours at a time over the course of the year. Just takes a long time to get something like that built. But I did in the end. It came out great, and I'm very proud of that instrument. Along the way, there was also lots of furniture that I made for myself and other people. But one of the things that I really enjoyed doing was for about 30 something years, I've been making all my Christmas presents. And I would find some nice thing that I wanted to make and design it myself and play around with the idea for a while and then make 20 or 25 of them. And my Christmas list of all my family and close friends would get a serving tray or a lamp or something like that every year.
Or if they were really lucky, they got a clock or a chair.
Yes. Well, the chair is some of my own furniture.
Okay, great.
That was a slightly larger project than a Christmas present.
And I see bird houses and votive candle holders. We're going to show these throughout, but I think that, you know, there's I want to get on that list, Greg. That's all I can say about that for now.
So I would say to somebody who wants to get into organ building or any kind of work that you do with your hands, just make some stuff and keep making it, and you'll learn things that there's no other way to learn. At CB Fisk, they look for problem solvers. They look for people who are interested in challenges. And then one of the other salient things about organ building is that nobody can build organs on that scale by themselves.
Right.
So you've got to learn how to be a team player and work with other people. And for me, part of project managing was learning to trust other people that they were going to take care of their parts and I would take care of my part, and then everything would come together in the end.
So you have to have some skill to start, but you just have to go get started.
Well, some people come to organ building with a background in music,
Oh, of course.
piano or harpsichord or organ, some keyboard instrument. And they might tend more toward the musical side, but we've certainly had people come who started out as musicians and learned the woodworking, or like me, started out as woodworkers and then had to learn the musical side of it. So, yeah, people
right.
come from a lot of different backgrounds.
Okay, well, let's, I want to just make sure that we give some time to the schooner adventure, because you did some amazing work there, and I'm going to show some of that here in the captain's quarters, and some of the work you restored. Maybe you want to just talk about what exactly was going on there at the schooner adventure.
Sure. Well, I started working at Adventure in 2010, and well, when I was still at Fisk and working a full schedule, so I had fewer hours to spend then. But I did get in on the last few years of the restoration. So when I got there, the hull was done, but there was nothing in it. There were no cabins, there were no cabin soles, the floor of the cabin, and the walls were just the inside of the ship. There wasn't any woodworking there. And I worked with other people, and I said I would do the restoration of the captain's cabin, which had been very painstakingly taken apart and stored.
Oh, wow.
But when we took it back out again, we found that it was much more damaged than anyone suspected. And it was beyond any restoration powers that I had. And so we determined that the best course would be to reconstruct it as close to the original as possible. And had it not been saved and carefully taken apart, I would have had a much harder job. But all the moldings needed to be recreated, and all the panels, and even finding the wood. It's quartered sycamore, which is not something you find at your local hardwood dealer.
Right.
So found all the wood, started in on it, and rebuilt it as close to the original as I could. Got wonderful help refinishing, putting new finish on that looked like the old finish. From a local fellow, Josh Sidlowski at Dogtown Restorations. And then that was dedicated to Joe and Helen Garland, who had been so crucial in the restoration. Joe was one of the ones that brought Adventure to Gloucester in the first place, and he and Helen supported us for many years and helped fund that restoration, helped purchase the materials and so forth for that restoration, and then I donated my time.
It's really exquisite, Greg. So thank you again for your hard work and leadership in that, and all those skills that you have built over the years really coming together. So now I'm going to return to your new portfolio of work. And as you said to me before, this is something that you kind of focus in on for gifts, for your own inner circle, but also more and more, during the holidays. Sounds like you're just getting out there. So we're going to show some of these beautiful pieces, the bird houses and the votive candle holders and the trays. And, should anybody be wanting to get in touch with you about any of this, how are you actually getting your work out there at this point? Are you showing it at shows? Are you thinking about selling it online? How are you going about this new side business of side businesses?
Right.
We'll call it.
Well, just last year, I dipped my toe in for the first time and participated in a couple of makers fairs late in the fall. And I had some extra pieces over the years of, I'd made a few more than I needed of this, that, and the other. And then I made a couple of runs of some of the popular items. And I did pretty well at the makers fairs. So I probably will do that again this year. And I'm also hoping to launch a website, gregbover.com. And I can be reached through Facebook and
email, I would think.
Oh, and email. Yeah.
Yep.
And my
Okay.
email address is just gregbover@cbfisk.com. I still have a
That's
Fisk
great. That's
mailing
great.
address. So yeah.
We'll make sure people know how to reach you. And are you doing any other like custom projects for people? Like if they need help with furniture or other kinds of things, do you wind up doing any custom work?
Yeah, I can do all kinds of furniture. I would be interested in designing pieces for one particular client at a time, rather than building great runs of things.
Right.
That would be much more interesting. I also do antique restoration and wooden boat restoration as well. Adventure is not the only boat work done. So
right. Well, it's great for people to know this, Greg, because those are all highly valued skills, in the world of trade, and harder to find. And I just hope that after all your hard work, after all these years, that you still love it all, because you're certainly really continuing, to build a beautiful portfolio.
Well, thank you. I have spent a lifetime trying to learn to love the process rather than the end game. Mostly when I finish a project, I'm disappointed that it didn't come out better, because of course all I can see are the things that could have been a little bit better. Nothing's ever perfect, but if I enjoy the process of the design and then the actual construction, then it's satisfying in a way that nothing else is. So,
and I think that's a good way for a lot of artists to be able to look at their work, right? To enjoy the process. Absolutely. Well, I think that's a good place to probably end today. And I want to thank you again for your time. And I hope that you will enjoy having this little capsule out there, this little capsule of your story here on Cape Ann. And I'm going to thank everybody for watching today, and encourage our viewers to look out for this on Channel 12, where you can also then find it on the 1623 YouTube playlist and on Facebook and Twitter. And please share it with all your friends. And thank you again to C Arts, 1623, and all our sponsors for supporting Cape Ann ARTWaves over the last 2.5 years. And thank you again to Greg Bover.
Thank you, Jackie. It was a pleasure.